At 30,000 feet, a deaf child's cries pierced the airplane, raw and desperate. Passengers sighed, rolled their eyes, and turned away, everyone except one small, fearless girl. She saw what no one else could, understood what no one else tried to hear, and with a single act was about to change everything. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments where in the world are you watching. The airplane cabin buzzed with the usual mid-morning chatter, the hum of engines blending with the occasional clatter of drink carts. Damon Ryder, a successful CEO who had built his fortune from the ground up, was trying to catch a moment of rest while keeping an eye on his 7-year-old son, Lucas. The boy, with his bright eyes and soft brown hair, had always been sensitive to new environments. Today, however, something was different. Without warning, Lucas began to cry, not the light whimper of a bored child, but a raw, urgent cry that pierced the cabin like glass. Heads turned, passengers shifted uncomfortably, and the murmurs of frustration rippled through the rows. Damon felt his heart tighten. Money, influence, power, none of it mattered here. He couldn't soothe his son, and the boy's distress seemed to grow with each passing second. Flight attendants offered polite reassurances, but their smiles couldn't mask their unease. Passengers averted their eyes, muttering about spoiled children, oblivious to the depth of Lucas's panic. Damon's chest ached as he tried to pick up his son, only to find Lucas jerking away, his small hands pressing against his ears. "I can't, Damon whispered, helpless, realizing words alone were useless. From a few rows ahead, a small figure watched intently. Ella, a 7-year-old girl with curious eyes and a quiet confidence, noticed something the adults didn't. She saw Lucas not as a crying child, but as someone desperate to communicate, trapped in a world of silence that most ignored. Without hesitation, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped into the aisle, her tiny frame weaving gracefully between chairs and passengers. Damon's panic rose. "Ella, wait!" he called, but she was already moving with determination that startled even the flight attendants. By the time she reached Lucas, the boy was clutching his favorite blue blanket, rocking slightly in fear. Ella knelt beside him, her hands beginning to move with fluid precision. Damon froze, unsure if this child could truly help, yet feeling an odd sense of hope. Lucas's eyes, tear-streaked and wide with confusion, followed her hands. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, his sobs began to soften. Damon watched in awe as Ella's hands formed one sign after another, clear, deliberate, patient. The little boy responded, hesitantly mimicking her movements. The crying eased into whimpers and then, miraculously, stopped. The cabin seemed to exhale collectively. Passengers whispered, astonished at the sudden calm. Damon knelt beside them, finally able to gently hold his son's shoulder without resistance. How?" he murmured, disbelief in his voice. Ella simply smiled, signing to Lucas with patience and care. It was more than words, it was understanding, empathy, a bridge between worlds that only children sometimes see. Beside them, a woman, Lucas's mother, watched, astonishment etched into her features. She had been learning sign language for years, yet her son's distress had always overwhelmed her. Now, with Ella's help, Lucas was calm, his breathing even, his eyes brightening. For the first time in hours, or maybe days, she felt hope. Damon exhaled, the weight of helplessness lifting slightly. He realized that sometimes the most profound connections come from the smallest gestures, the quiet courage of someone willing to step into another's pain and meet them there. Ella had done that, and as the plane continued its steady hum over clouds stretching endlessly below, Damon knew this moment would mark the beginning of something far greater than a single flight, far greater than himself, something that could change all their lives. Lucas's sobs had faded, leaving a hush over the cabin that felt almost heavier than the cries themselves. Damon watched, barely breathing, as Ella continued to communicate with his son through graceful, precise hand movements. Each sign seemed to unravel Lucas's fear, replacing it with a sense of calm that no amount of spoken reassurance could achieve. It was mesmerizing and deeply humbling. "His name is Lucas," Damon whispered to the woman beside him, Lucas's mother, though she already knew. The moment felt surreal. Her eyes glistened as she observed Ella's hands glide through the air. This small, determined girl was doing what Damon had feared he could never do, reach his son in a language beyond words, in a way that touched his very soul. Lucas's hands moved tentatively at first, trying to mimic Ella's gestures. The transformation was immediate and astonishing. What had been chaos turned into connection. Damon felt a lump in his throat as he realized that while he had all the resources in the world, a simple act of empathy from a child had bridged the gap he could not. "Thank you," the woman breathed, her voice barely audible over the plane's hum. Damon could see the tension in her shoulders loosen for the first time since the flight began. She had been doing everything she could for her son, therapies, lessons, love, but nothing had prepared her for this moment of instantaneous understanding. Ella tilted her head, her expressive eyes encouraging Lucas, and he began to respond more confidently. The boy's hands moved faster now, forming signs that Ella gently corrected and guided. There was laughter too, soft, bubbling giggles that had no sound but were unmistakable in expression. Damon's heart swelled as he realized that Lucas was experiencing joy for the first time in hours, perhaps days. Time seemed to stretch as the two children interacted, hands dancing through stories, questions, and jokes. Damon watched Ella's patience, her focus, and her empathy, and felt a deep admiration for her courage. She had seen someone in need, acted without hesitation, and in doing so had altered the course of a moment that had felt impossibly dire. "This is incredible," Damon murmured, more to himself than anyone else. He watched as Lucas's shoulders relaxed, his chest rising and falling with calm, steady breaths. Ella was teaching him not just signs, but trust, confidence, and connection. She was showing him that someone could truly understand him, and in that understanding he was safe. Passengers who had been uncomfortable moments earlier now watched with quiet fascination. Some smiled, some whispered, but no one interrupted. The room was filled with a shared sense of awe, a realization that communication, true connection, could transcend age, status, or circumstance. Finally, Damon knelt beside his son, careful not to intrude, letting the children continue their silent conversation. Lucas looked up at him briefly, eyes shining as if to say, "I'm okay now." Damon felt an overwhelming mixture of relief, gratitude, and wonder. This was more than a moment, it was a revelation. As the plane cruised above the clouds, Damon realized that life sometimes offers unexpected teachers. They come not with diplomas or titles, but with courage, intuition, and a willingness to step forward when others look away. Ella had reminded him, in a single act of bravery, that empathy could break through barriers that money, power, or status never could. The flight attendants moved down the aisle discreetly, checking on passengers, but even they paused as they noticed Lucas's calm demeanor and the radiant focus of the two children. Damon exchanged a glance with Lucas's mother, both silently acknowledging the miracle that had occurred. For Damon, this was a lesson in humility and in hope. A reminder that sometimes the smallest hands, guided by understanding and courage, could hold the power to heal, connect, and transform. And as the plane continued its journey across endless skies, Damon knew that this moment would linger, not just in memory, but in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed it. The hours passed quietly after Lucas calmed, but the impact of the moment lingered like a quiet heartbeat. Damon watched as Ella and Lucas continued their hand-language conversation, exchanging stories and small gestures that carried worlds of meaning. He realized that what had begun as a desperate moment of fear had blossomed into something far more profound, a bridge between two lives that had been isolated in different ways. When the captain announced that the flight would begin its descent, Damon finally felt he could breathe again. He knelt beside Lucas, brushing a hand across the boy's hair. "You did amazing," he whispered. Lucas's hands moved slowly, signing back a message that Damon struggled to fully understand, but the sentiment was clear: gratitude and connection. Damon looked up at Ella, who gave a small, confident nod, as if to say, "He's yours again. He's safe." After the flight landed, Damon insisted on meeting Ella's guardian, wanting to properly thank her for allowing this miracle to happen. Her name was Caroline, a single mother with a gentle demeanor who smiled nervously as she shook his hand. She had watched the entire interaction with a mixture of awe and relief. "She's remarkable," Caroline said softly. "She's always been observant, but I didn't realize she could make such a difference." Damon could only nod, realizing that no measure of money or influence could ever replace the power of insight, courage, and empathy. Over the next few days, Damon noticed a change in Lucas. The boy seemed lighter, more confident, and strangely eager to communicate, not just with sign language, but with gestures and expressions that reflected a newfound trust in the world around him. Damon encouraged continued interaction, arranging a meeting with Ella in a local park. The children immediately gravitated toward one another, hands flying as they signed jokes, small stories, and questions. Damon observed in wonder as Lucas's world expanded before his eyes, no longer limited by fear or frustration. Caroline joined them, quietly watching the two children, offering small pointers when necessary. Damon felt a surge of admiration and gratitude for her dedication. She had raised Ella to be observant, empathetic, and brave, qualities that had transformed not only Lucas's flight experience, but also the way Damon viewed the world. He realized that parenting, true parenting, was less about control and more about presence, understanding, and guidance. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between Lucas and Ella grew stronger. They discovered shared interests, drawing, storytelling, and small experiments in silent communication. Damon learned from Ella's example, practicing patience and attentiveness in ways he had never needed before. The experience reshaped his priorities, emphasizing connection over work, empathy over efficiency. Caroline and Damon began to share conversations too, about childhood, parenting, grief, and hopes for the future. Damon realized that her strength and resilience mirrored Ella's courage. There was a mutual respect that slowly deepened into trust. While their focus remained on the children, an unspoken understanding grew between them, that people who truly see and nurture children often find themselves transformed in return. One quiet afternoon, Damon watched Lucas and Ella laughing silently in the park, hands moving like dancers in a choreographed story. He understood then that these moments were teaching both children and adults alike, that connection, empathy, and understanding were the greatest gifts anyone could offer. Money could buy comfort, security, and opportunity, but it could never buy presence, courage, or the ability to truly see another human being. By the time they returned home, Damon was convinced that their lives had been forever altered. Lucas had learned more about trust and communication than months of therapy could provide. Damon himself had discovered humility, gratitude, and a deeper appreciation for the unexpected teachers in life. Ella, small but mighty, had changed the trajectory of a child's world and, in turn, reshaped the adults around her. As night fell and the city lights flickered through his apartment window, Damon realized that this was only the beginning. Friendships had formed, bonds were deepening, and the lessons of courage, empathy, and connection were still unfolding. He knew that the next steps, building routines, fostering continued growth, and embracing the bonds between Lucas and Ella, would define not just their present but their future. And in that quiet reflection, Damon made a silent promise, that he would never underestimate the power of small, brave acts, and that he would always honor the gift that Ella had given them. A gift far greater than wealth, far greater than influence. A true understanding, a bridge between worlds, and a reminder that compassion could change everything. Weeks turned into months, and the connection between Lucas and Ella deepened beyond what Damon could have imagined. Their silent conversations had become a language of trust, laughter, and unspoken understanding. Lucas was no longer just a frightened child on a plane. He was confident, expressive, and joyful in ways Damon had only dreamed of. Ella had given him more than comfort. She had given him a voice, even when words failed. Damon watched as the children explored their world together, drawing, signing stories to each other, and inventing games that bridged silence and sound. Every interaction carried lessons, not just for Lucas, but for Damon himself. He had learned patience, empathy, and the importance of truly seeing someone's inner world. Caroline had become a steady presence as well, guiding Ella with gentle wisdom and supporting Damon in nurturing Lucas's newfound confidence. One crisp morning, Damon arranged a special outing to a local science museum. Lucas and Ella's hands moved frantically as they signed questions and observations to each other, their faces alight with excitement. Damon noticed that the world, once intimidating for Lucas, now felt like a canvas waiting to be explored. He marveled at how a single act of courage on a crowded airplane had set all this in motion. Caroline and Damon exchanged smiles, sharing the quiet understanding that these children had taught them lessons no seminar, therapy session, or book could ever provide. It was about presence, attention, and the courage to reach across the invisible divides in life. They saw each other in a new light, not just as caregivers, but as partners in guiding these young lives through a complex world. As the seasons changed, Damon and Caroline began to spend more time together outside of the children's activities. Conversations about parenting, challenges, and hopes evolved into laughter, shared dreams, and subtle glances that spoke volumes. They realized that the same qualities that made Ella such a remarkable child, compassion, intuition, courage, were mirrored in Caroline herself. Damon felt drawn not only to her parenting, but to her heart, her resilience, and the depth of care she carried quietly. The day came when Damon and Lucas had to return home after a long weekend. Lucas hugged Ella tightly, his small hands gripping hers with a promise of continued friendship. Ella's smile was radiant, her eyes sparkling with the certainty that their bond would endure. Damon felt a mixture of gratitude and awe, gratitude for this brave little girl who had changed everything, awe at the way simple human kindness could ripple outward, transforming lives. Back at home, Damon reflected on the journey that had begun with a desperate cry on a plane. What started as a moment of panic had evolved into an ongoing story of connection, courage, and love. Lucas had flourished, Damon had grown as a father, and the bond between the children had created a bridge between two worlds that had once seemed isolated. Eventually, Caroline and Damon realized that their lives were intertwined in more ways than they had anticipated. Their shared dedication to the children, their mutual respect, and the trust built through countless small moments created a foundation that extended beyond friendship. Love blossomed quietly, naturally, and profoundly. Years later, Damon and Caroline would recall that day on the plane not as a chaotic moment of fear, but as the beginning of something extraordinary. Lucas and Ella had remained inseparable friends, their bond a living testament to the power of understanding, empathy, and courage. Damon knew that sometimes the smallest acts, a child refusing to look away, a hand reaching out to another, could change the course of multiple lives forever. And as the children grew, laughing, learning, and exploring together, Damon realized the ultimate truth. The greatest wealth in life was not measured in dollars or titles, but in connection, empathy, and the courage to step forward when someone needed you most. That single brave act of compassion had not only healed a frightened child, but had shaped the hearts of everyone around them, proving that love, understanding, and courage could indeed transform the world.